Hi, I'm Jay. So, online video and comedy have been intertwined since seemingly the start. I mean, think about the first video you saw on YouTube. I remember Charlie Bit My Finger, Fred, and the Ultimate Showdown of Ultimate Destiny fondly as some of my first experiences on the internet. And as much as we've grown as a vast community, that part of us has always remained consistent, even when the humor involved moves past the realm of normal understanding, or irony is built on irony is built on irony. We see it in our #1 YouTuber, PewDiePie, at the time of writing this. We see it in our daily dose of Vine compilations, and we even see it in things that aren't classified as comedy more and more. Was there always a focus on humor alongside education, alongside art critique? The line between humor and anything else on the internet has all but vanished, and that comes with some interesting consequences. One of them is a phenomenon I'd like to call natus ridiculum, or coming from humor, because I like saying it and I'm pretentious enough to make up words. This word describes something in the middle of a genre and a medium. It means anything that started as humor and frivolousness, but moved beyond that in some sort of way. And today I want to examine some of the things that make this kind of story unique, whether it be good or bad. There are more modern examples of this, to be sure, but to start, let's take one of the first web series in internet history, Red vs. Blue, which began as a deconstruction of tropes and a satire of the Halo series. It's really hard to get someone into Red vs. Blue. You can tell them that it has great characters, emotional moments, cool fight scenes and all, but for the first few seasons it has absolutely none of those. It just has comedy filmed in a machinima fashion with bad graphics and bad microphones. But they kept doing it, flying by the seat of their pants until they started having ideas that weren't just funny. Ideas about continuity, the plot, and turning this wacky, slapstick world into an actual fictional universe. It's fantastic. The characters and plots become interesting and emotionally charged. The dark pasts of the Reds and Blues are revealed. The struggle continues, and it's still funny. That's important. It comes from comedy, but it never moves away from it. This natus ridiculum has taken on new forms in the past few years, and a lot of them are phenomenal. Thomas Sanders created a bunch of characters for him to play in Vines back when he was the Vine star, and now that he has his own YouTube channel, those characters are being brought back in Sanders' sides, which, while not a super serious show, sometimes does deal with very personal issues, all through the lens of these wacky characters. That's a somewhat popular method, particularly on YouTube. Introducing characters for the sake of laughs before telling a more serious narrative. The YouTuber Benjaminutes was doing comedy sketches for years before realizing he could put the characters he was using together. Now the story of Riftdale is a constant source of mystery and intrigue. Markiplier's egos are a similar situation, offhandedly created by Mark himself, cultivated by the community around him, and then finally coming to a head. But how and why does it work? Why does putting comedy characters in emotionally charged situations so often make a good story? The key, I believe, is the term comedy characters. For the bite-sized sketches that Sanders' Sides and Benjaminutes started out as, the characters don't have a lot of time to develop, meaning that they lean heavily on archetypes. An archetype to me is the simplest version of a character, the one that allows it to relate best with the other characters that fall under that archetype. It's kind of just a series of traits. The old, wise, magical man might have traits that include being tall, having a long beard, being old, wise, magical, and male. They're all just traits that fall in line with the archetype, but your wise guy doesn't have to have all of them, just enough that we recognize the trope. Which is why we quickly recognize Prince Charming in Roman, Oblivious Nerd in Logan, and Emo with a Heart of Gold in Virgil. A serious and emotionally impactful story usually needs good characters that can contrast each other in their interactions, which is perfect because the comedy being used in these natus ridiculum stories is character-driven as opposed to event-driven. The humor works because of the characters involved, not because of the things happening. Here's an example. This Vine is event-based comedy. To find it funny, you don't need to know that guy, just that he got frickin' creamed. This Vine...
You get one phone call. Give me that!
On the other hand, is character-driven in the most simplistic way. It's using the stereotypes you have of Mexicans to create a character in your head immediately, and then using that character to tell a joke. The Vines that eventually made up the foundation of Sanders' Sides did this too, using not racist stereotypes, but societal ones, like the stereotypical dad, or the stereotypical Prince Charming. Even Red vs. Blue, with its substantially longer runtime, establishes the characters quickly using archetypes reminiscent of the 7 deadly sins. Church is always grumpy and angry. Tucker is into women and sex. Griff is always lazy, and Sarge has an inflated sense of pride. This quick method forces the creators to make characters that are distinctive, easy for the audience to figure out, and interact in entertaining ways. And the fact that it's character-driven comedy means that it matters less what happens to the characters and more what they do in relation to each other, which is why changing setting like Red vs. Blue does when it gets real doesn't feel like it detracts from the comedy. Good characters are a dynamic between flaws and likability, with both being essential to an audience member's investment in the story. I said in my Aang vs. Korra video that it meant the character had to be good at something, and I kind of stand by that. The Reds and Blues don't have any particular talents except managing not to die. Church is still having trouble with that one. But they're good at being funny, which makes us like them. Since their characters are built around their flaws so tightly, we relate with them too, as we recognize exaggerated versions of how we act. So now that we have our characters in their simplest forms, we can just work backwards in terms of complexity, slowly developing them further and further. So when an emotional beat that can't just rely on something as general as archetypes comes along, the characters and audience are primed for it. Sounds great, right? Well, there is a bit of a problem. There are only so many archetypes out there, and the stories associated with them would begin to seem stale if they relied on only the archetypes at the start, like Red vs. Blue does. Hell, Benjaminutes and Thomas Sanders both have a stereotypical dad character already, created entirely separately. So they have to be different, or we as the audience will have seen it before. We need a way to build more unique characters using comedy, but in a way that doesn't bore the audience, and that's where the other part of character-driven comedy comes in, the subversion. David Lopez uses our expectations about normal people to set up his joke, and then uses the racist Mexican stereotype to subvert it for the punchline, but that's not the only way to go. Thomas Sanders and Benjaminutes use those archetypes to subvert the tropes associated with them. Prince Charming always gets the girl, except he's not into girls. It's not using our expectation of people and then subverting it with a stereotype like David Lopez, it's using our expectation of the stereotype first and then subverting it. Since the subversion is the character in Lopez's Vines, if everyone did it like him, we'd end up with a bunch of characters that aren't all that unique in the beginnings of their stories. And that is what we see in Red vs. Blue's first few seasons. But since the subversion with Benjaminutes and Sanders is on the character, you can get a lot of unique versions of that archetype. Imagine naive cop, jaded cop, except one of them makes a bunch of stupid puns that warp reality. Evangelical priest on the internet, except he's addicted to cocaine. That's why, even though Thomas has a dad character and Riffdale has a dad character, they're absolutely nothing alike apart from design. It's because both of them use the dad stereotype as their setup, but then they subverted it in wildly different ways. Thomas did it by making Patton, the dad, the most immature person present in any given situation, while Benjaminutes did it by imagining Dad as an infinitely powerful cosmic being who's everyone's dad, and whose conventions of morality, culture, and family differ from the average human in a hilariously unsettling manner. The lore of Markiplier is almost a different monster altogether because of the sheer amount of two very important things: fans and time. Natus Ridiculum is difficult to get off the ground, but having it attached to an ever-growing gaming channel was exactly the push Mark's characters needed. Wilfred Wharfstash began as a generic, exaggerated archetype. The news anchor? Yeah, due to the evolution of Mark's idea of Wharfstash, the character has appeared in many different forms and roles throughout the past half-decade, the only measures of consistency being his pink mustache, eccentric nature, and speech patterns. Eventually, the character would grow to be associated with unintentional murder, adultery, and the nature of sanity itself. In some sense, this is just an exaggeration of all the stuff we saw before, warped by time and Mark's crazy ideas. His inconsistent nature is part of his character, so that's never an issue. Darkiplier is a far stranger case, being a fan creation off of the occasional, unsettling facial expressions Mark would insert into videos. While Mark had a hand in shaping Wharfstash, Darkiplier was more of a cultivated character, born mainly out of the fan consciousness and even mocked by Mark. Until, of course, Mark inevitably decided in February of 2017 that if he was going to do this, he would do it right, leading to the glitching, red and blue social manipulator that we know and love. Tracking this new medium is a lot of fun, particularly because it's new and there's a fair bit of untread ground. For example, a show might be comedic most of the time, but every so often delve into heartfelt moments like Camp does. Or maybe an actual TV show will do it in reverse, using a serious story to create comedy in the beginning. Maybe they already do that. Why is this sentence in the fucking script? It's also fun to observe the problems that come with this medium. I mean, all 4 examples I've played with here have been accidental in their progression. It just kind of happened, meaning that Benjaminutes had to write circles around the antics in his original sketches so as to avoid plot holes. I think that limits can be a good way to channel creativity, and having to plan a story you've been telling without realizing it creates a few potentially productive challenges. In case this doesn't go without saying, I love these 4 stories and urge you to check them out with the links in the description, if only to see the artistic progression of culture, if you needed an excuse. It's a strange and fascinating turnout that some of the precise elements of good comedy are exactly those needed for other kinds of stories, isn't it? Makes you wonder if that transition could be applied anywhere else. Anyways, thanks for watching, I'm Jay, and I'll see you later.